Diamond. So before I start, you can find me on all this social media. I must just say I'm new to Twitter, so you might see some behavior that's similar to your mom. But before I start, let's talk a little bit about myself. My name is Diamond. This is my born name, so I've been with this name forever. And I'm originally from Hong Kong. I am currently living in US. This is my 10th year in US, and I'm actually moving to New York on Sunday. Yay. I have two dogs, Truffle and Waffle, and you'll see why it's relevant later. And lastly, I just want to bring up this very important thing for the talk. That is, I don't drink coffee, and I only drink boba tea. So just leave that with you. And today, we're going to talk about design sprint. Assuming majority of you are designers, most of you already would know what I'm about to tell you, but what I'm actually trying to tell you guys is like providing you a structure to prevent a potential panic attack in the near future. So when it comes to design sprint, it's nothing too revolutionary. But working for Facebook is somewhat different in my experience because Facebook designers would design for 2 billion active people. It means that you don't no longer have a specific user you're designing for. Pretty much everybody in this audience, my parents who don't know how to use Facebook, my boyfriend's grandmother from Turkey who doesn't speak English is also my user. So as a result, design at Facebook, it's a little different. And I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about how the process is and how we approach a certain design problem. So first, for product designer at Facebook, as in the title, we have this spectrum called product, where we actually lead what the vision is about, what we want to do with the product, what is actually most suited for our users. And obviously, the other side of it, design. So we're also responsible to maintain a certain craft expectation, etc. And in between, there's me. I'm a product designer here. So the question is, how do we design for 2 billion people? There are three main collaborative ways that us Facebook designers follow. The first one, workshop. Workshop is like running 100 meters. It's usually a very small crowd, and you're focused on executing on a solution. So it means that you already know what you're designing. You just want a group of people to help you figure out how to make the best out of this solution. The second one is a design sprint. Design sprint is basically like running a relay. You have your team, you're working through a defined problem. So the problem is there, it's just you're not jumping into the solution yet. So you want to use design sprint to help you guide to the solution. And lastly, pathfinding. Pathfinding, it's like running a half marathon. It's like a longer duration, you focus on a complex problem, and it is the most time and involves the most people. So sometimes you don't even know what you're trying to do, but you're trying to define what is the trend, what you're trying to do, etc. Today, we're specifically focusing on design sprints. Design sprint is an industry-known methodology. Like I said, I'm not teaching you something new, but I'm teaching you a method that works for me, and I don't have panic attack from it. So every company or person has their own adaptation, and my favorite way to actually run for a solution is design sprint. Because most of the time, we already know what is not working. We just need a solution roadmap to help us guide to the outcome of it. So design sprint is a time-constrained exercise, and we're using the 5 phases of design thinking. Speaking of the 5 phases of design thinking, so this is a quick breakdown of what the design thinking process looks like, and I'm sure you guys have some sort of methodology you guys follow. It's somewhat close to this, and it's a framework first started by Stanford, and again adapted to different ways by different people. At Facebook, we start from empathize. So it's really understand who you're designing for and understand why you're designing for them. The idea of this is work with your user researcher to help isolate yourself from the user so you can actually design for them objectively. And then define, meaning what are you trying to do in here? Defining what is the problem, defining what is your solution, defining what is your minimum viable product. And this is the part that you usually want to pair up with a product manager or a researcher to come up with what is the definition of this. And then the third part, ideate, which is most designers very familiar with. You know what is the problem now, so let's generate the solution. This is the part that usually a designers will lead what you want the ideation process look like, and we're going to talk a little bit deeper in this. And then once you have 60 or 100, I don't know how many ideas you have, pick the ones that you like the most or you're most passionate about to prototype. And when it comes to prototyping, you can do very low fidelity prototype, or you can do very high fidelity that you pair up with an engineer to actually show it to your user. And lastly, validate. Validate with the people that are representational to your user. So recruit a bunch of testers with your researcher. Identify a diverse group of testers, such as different age, different gender, different socioeconomical background, so you can actually learn about what does your prototype or your idea is not working. It looks pretty simple, right? In reality, it looks more like this. So it is messy, and it can take up to multiple rounds to actually figure out what is a good product. But like any other good product, the process of getting into a simple solution is rather complex. Designing for Facebook means that it is a complex place, and whatever you actually put into the app, you're changing the user behavior significantly. So recently I shipped a test called the Up-Down Vote Project, and AKA the crowdsourcing on Facebook. We're letting people upvoting or downvoting comments on Facebook for the first time. The idea is letting users have the power over the ranking. So you will upvote a comment when it's meaningful to the conversation. You will downvote a comment when it's irrelevant or it contains hate speech, etc. On a design perspective, it looks pretty easy, right? At the end of the day, it's only 2 arrows. But when it's squeezing into a giant product or a complex product like that, it takes rounds and rounds of iteration. And this product actually came out from a design sprint in 2017. And then Chris Cox actually brought it into F8 in 2018, and hence we got the momentum of what we are doing. So it is very exciting to run a design sprint because you can actually push a product as such out. So why don't we start sprinting? The idea of doing a sprint is basically squeezing your 5 phases of design thinking into a week or 8 days of design sprint. But first, preparation. The key to avoid a panic attack is to prepare, because you're actually including a bunch of people and actually having their time in your sprint. So prepare, prepare, prepare. This is a screenshot of a recent design sprint I ran, and it really boils down to the outline. So when it comes to the preparation, there are 3 things you need to do. Figure out what is the purpose, who are the people, and then lastly, what's your plan? Purpose. Basically, do you have a concrete problem to run a sprint? You're about to involve like 7, 10, 15 people into your sprint. So do you know what you're trying to do? What is your company or team's mission? What are your goals? What is the deliverable? The deliverable is very important because this is the part that you usually get the buy-in. So be as specific as possible. And then obviously, who should be part of your sprint? This is very key, because a lot of the times that we actually invite people that would benefit our sprint, but you don't really think about who will actually benefit from our sprint. So take that under consideration. Think about who can actually be beneficial and benefit from it. And then what is everybody's roles? Usually the person who initiates the sprint will be considered as a sprint lead. You're the person who guides the outcome, etc. And recruit someone that is a facilitator that can help you figure out the logistics. And lastly, the plan. Where should you run the sprint? How long is the sprint? What about food and refreshers? So the idea of, I like to run design sprint outside of the office, because if you run something on-site, guess what? People are gonna go to their meetings, they have their projects. So I like to run a design sprint off-site, especially not a separate room, so they cannot take meeting calls. So they will be 100% focused. And when it comes to jumping into a creative process, it really helps to get out of your office space. And think about what does your day-to-day look like. When it comes to the day-to-day, Figure out what is your daily agenda. So one way to think about it is we have 5 phases of design thinking, right? You can actually break them up into a 1-week sprint where each day you focus on a specific theme. So the first day is to empathize, second day is to define, et cetera, et cetera. A second way you can think about it is 1.5-week sprint, which is my favorite way, because you can spend the first week to actually ideate and the second week to actually execute and validate. Bottom line, a sprint is supposed to be a fast-paced thing for you to actually generate solutions. So don't do anything more than, I would say, 2 weeks. And if it's something more than 2 weeks, you might have to think about a path-finding solution. And I personally also like to break it down into a by-minute agenda, because the more details you can iron out, the more relaxed you will be later, and you can figure out the details more later, actually right before. So your stakeholders would know what exactly you're trying to do, and you know what you're actually trying to do. So now you're done with the preparation, we can start sprinting. But first, icebreaker. You're including like 7, 10, 15 people in the room, and maybe data scientists or engineers you rarely talk to. Say hi, ask them what's their name, what's their favorite fruit. Do a little bit icebreaker. As a design lead, you should actually implement these small little things to make people's life a little bit happier. Okay, so we can finally start design sprinting. The first step is empathize. When it comes to empathize, it means that usually your researcher will tell you there's a concrete problem you're trying to solve. And I'm trying to run a design sprint that we all care about. So let me ask, who of you guys like dogs? Raise your hand. Okay, great. I was like a little scared. I was like, nobody raised their hand because we were going to design for my dogs. So who are you seeing is Waffle and Truffle. They're my dogs, and yes, I'm the owner that would dress up my dog on Halloween. They're Yoko Ono and John Lennon in here. So these are our user for the next 10 minutes, so take a good look at them. Typically, when you run a design sprint, you already have information about your user or the group of users that you're designing for. So I've already gone ahead and prepared some information for you. So Waffle is a Dachshund, a sausage dog, so I've had him since I came to America. Truffle may be a mutt, I don't know what he is, I adopted him. But they're really cute. So this is the part that people are most excited about, so let's sink in, okay? So let's take a closer look at Waffle. Waffle is a Dachshund, AKA a wiener dog, AKA a sausage dog. It means that he has a medium-sized dog back, but tiny puppy legs. And in medical term, we call this a weirdly long body. So it just means that they are cute because of how they're structured, but at the same time, they have their own problem that they have a long back and short legs. In UX term, we actually like to call Waffle a persona, because Waffle actually identify a bunch of characteristics that overlaps with other users, such as our friend corgis and basset hounds. They are all having the similarities of a weirdly long body, a medium-sized dog back, and tiny puppy legs. When you're designing, when you identify your persona, it's often helpful because, again, you're isolating your perspective and really put yourselves in their paws to figure out what their problem is. So you're no longer just designing for Waffle, you're designing for all the Waffles, all the corgis, and all the basset hounds out there. So let's take a closer look at Waffle. Waffle has a medium-sized dog back and tiny puppy legs, and we adore them. He's really cute. But long-bodied dogs actually have this problem. When they're actually walking up and down, their spine creates this friction in between their bones that generate this thing called herniated disc. And a couple years ago, Waffle actually got herniated disc, and he lost his ability to run because he lost his ability to use his back legs, and it's incredibly common on dogs like corgis and dachshunds and all that. It's sad. So we have successfully empathized our user. It is really depressing to see your dog suffering. Okay, I need to call this out because I forgot to do my last round. He's fine now. I forgot to say that in my last talk. So he's fine now, but now we have successfully empathized what Waffle needs or long body dog needs. At Facebook, we also like to identify this thing called people problem, which is a specific quote quoted by or inspired or quoted by our persona to help us really get get into their perspective, understanding why we're trying to do this. And here, Waffle doesn't ever want to lose the ability to chase squirrels again. So we have successfully empathized our user as a crowd. So let's start defining our problem. Like I said, designing for a huge crowd of users, especially for 2 billion people, it's intimidating. Because where do you start? I like to use this exercise called the 5 W's. Who, what, why, when, and where. So this is a strategy that I think it's very helpful for us to identify what is the goal. It's a really quick methodology. We can quickly answer this thing one by one to understand what we're trying to do and make sure you get alignment across the team. So we want to design for the long body dogs because we want to help them to reduce the chance of getting spine problems. Because we don't want them to lose the ability to ever use their legs again. When, where? Maybe you don't have all the answers right now, but the sooner you can actually answer these things, the faster you can actually go into the conclusion. And most importantly, you can actually get to the phase to identify what is your minimum viable product. And this is the part that I also like to encourage you guys to not just think about this in a room, actually talk to your product manager, ask your user researcher if this actually makes sense. And then third, you have identified the problem, you have understand your user, so let's start ideating. This is the part that usually designers are the people who lead it, but anyone in the audience or anyone can actually do it. It's not rocket science. Just include everybody else. So include all your stakeholders, include all your peers, because this is a time that you can actually start influencing each other. So let's talk about how do we ideate. When it comes to ideation, I use this little framework called the ideation burger. So first, how might we? Second, markers and post-its. And lastly, storyboarding. Basically, this is a methodology you think of like your level of thinking from very high level to deep down into like the details of how do you execute. So how might we statement, it's a short questions that launch brainstorms. It fall out of your point of view statements or design principle as seeds. So think about this is, you don't want to jump into the conclusion or the solution. Take a step back and think about what are the questions that can actually help guide you or guide the team, inspire the team into the solution. So for example, we can do, how might we help improve the mobility for long body dogs? Or how might we reduce stress on their back? So again, we're not jumping into solution. We're thinking about why we're designing and how we're designing it. Second, markers and post-its. It's very straightforward. Get some markers, get some post-its. And I want to emphasize the idea of markers because they're thick, so you cannot put too many words on it. The idea is to keep this stage fast, short, and bold. There are no bad ideas at this point. We just want to generate as many solutions as possible, even wilder ideas are encouraged. And then once you've identified that, jump into the storyboard. Pick the ones that you're excited about and start ideating frame to frame of what it looks like. For the folks that actually design for software, print out paper with phones on it, you can draw out what does it look like step by step. And again, this is the ideation burger because if you squint enough, it is actually a burger. So this is a way to actually just help you guys to remember the 3 methodology. How might we's, markers and post-its, and storyboarding. So when it comes to ideation, you usually will come up with a pool of ideas, good, bad, wild, crazy. And when you're designing in a room, it really helps when you start categorizing them into different buckets. Because most of the time, we actually think very alike when everyone is into the problem together. So start identifying what does the bucket look like. So maybe it's about the accessory, maybe it's about the North Star approach, maybe it's about assistant. This can again help the team to take a step back to think about a broader experience you're trying to do, so to kind of de-risk what you're actually trying to execute. So let's say my bouncy shoes idea is too crazy, but the idea is actually creating an accessory, which a ramp might actually make more sense, etc. And once you've identified that, you can jump into prototype. Prototyping, usually you want to do something that is feasible because you want to do something that's not too crazy. So in this sense, a bouncy shoes or rocket ship would be a little too crazy. I run a one-woman company, so I've decided to go with the idea of helium balloons. When it comes to prototyping, the most important two things you want to do is you want to make sure your prototype is functional and representational to your end goal. So you can actually prototype your idea out and share it to the people around you. You're not necessarily designing for your desk mate who is also as advanced as you are, but it's worthwhile to actually get a gut check of if your idea is good. So I've already recruited Buddy here to try out the idea of helium balloons and see how he thinks. So this is the part that when you actually show it to a human being, they can tell you, oh, what is working, what is not, and just get an initial feedback. But in my opportunity, I actually think that Buddy loves it. So it means that, okay, you got the check mark of like the peers actually sign off, they love it. So finally, let's get it to the validation phase. As I said, when it comes to validation phase, make sure to recruit people that are representational to your user. So recruit people that are diverse backgrounds, socioeconomic, gender, race, etc. And I've decided to recruit my friend's dog, a corgi named Ellie and Waffle, to help me test the product. So usually you would want to pair it with a researcher, but here again I run a one-woman company, so I've done it myself. And I've tied my prototype into them and see what is their feedback. This is the part that you can actually get honest feedback, and in my case, super honest feedback, because they cannot even lie to you. This is the part that you review the gaps and unknowns. And yes, we would love people telling me they love my product and it's amazing, it's beautiful, but it's actually more validating when they actually tell you what is not working. In my case, I forgot to factor out this one important thing, that dogs hate balloons. And you can see in here, Ellie was scared. She was so scared, she actually ran under my couch to pee afterwards. I'm not kidding. And this is great, because now I learned that helium balloons might not be the best thing I've done in here. But it doesn't mean that everything is going to waste, because you can go back to your ideation board and see, oh, what is actually working back then? Maybe rocket ship is really the way to go. So you can jump back to your ideation and pick up the ideas again and start prototyping. Or maybe your people problem, it's not even good at the beginning, so maybe you can start from there. So that's how you run a design sprint with the 5 phases of design thinking. To kind of recap what we have talked about today, so the 5 phases of design thinking: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and validate. First, empathize. Identify who are your personas. Why are you trying to do this? Work with your user researcher to actually identify the clear problem you're designing. Be objective and put yourselves in their shoes. Second, define. Work with your product manager. Work with your user researcher. Use the 5W exercise to actually identify what are your challenges, what are your goals, and most importantly, your minimum viable product. Third, ideate. Again, design is the ones that we can actually lead the process in here, but again, everyone can do this. Use the ideation burger, how might we use markers and post-its, and the storyboarding. And then include everyone, make everyone a winner, and obviously have fun. This is the part that you can actually throw the most exciting ideas out, even though maybe it's not really doable at the moment, but it's still worthwhile to put it out so you can inspire each other. And then pick the ones that you're excited about and prototype it. Design can prototype a low fidelity prototype, or you can work with an engineer to actually make a very high fidelity prototype to make it a usable product. You want to iterate fast, make sure that it's functional and representational to your end goal. And lastly, to validate, make sure that you recruit a diverse group of users so you can actually review the unknowns and gaps and help you reevaluate what is working and what is not. Like I said, it's not rocket science. Most of you guys already know bits and pieces, and this is just a structure for you to think through of running a design sprint. So lastly, a word of advice. First, stay hydrated. A lot of the times that when we go to a design sprint, we forget to drink water. So make sure that you actually provide water, or for some of you guys, coffee, even though it's contradicting, but if that's the fuel power, actually provide that for your people. And then, the power of breaks, and how we Swedish like to call it fika. So this is very important, because a lot of the times you're so excited, you start generating. I'm sure you guys have those times that you're so zoned in, you forget to actually take a bio break, water break, actually implemented that into our daily agenda. So we make sure that people know when to actually step away from the computer. And lastly, have fun. When do you actually get the chance to actually step away from a day-to-day, say no to all your meetings, and actually have fun with people to come up with a solution? So this is a process to really have fun and enjoy with the rest of your peers and other people. And this is how you run a design sprint without a panic attack. Thank you.